So just a few quick questions to kind of get to know you as a person. Like, what would you be doing, you think, if you weren't an entrepreneur?
Well, it was never the plan to be an entrepreneur. I was supposed to write novels. That was my ambition. I was an English major,
cool.
English lit major. But I did not successfully write novels. And then I figured the fallback plan was to be a school teacher, which is kind of the family business. But it turned out that I had some talent in sales, and I wound up selling digital advertising and evolved from there.
What one piece of, like your best piece of advice you'd give to a fledgling entrepreneur?
The best.
Or just
a lot.
A good piece of advice.
I mean, I think that the advice I would give is this. When you're starting a company, if you're trying to start a company, pick a space that you understand well. It's too easy, and I've made this mistake. It's really easy to make this mistake when after you've had a successful exit and you start looking out there and going, I'm going to solve all sorts of problems. I mean, for me, it was the independent film space. When my wife and I have a production company, we've made a documentary film. We dabble in that space, and we don't make the film. We have a partner who actually has talent. But I was convinced that after Right Media, once I took my breather, I was going to revolutionize the independent film world and how that gets distributed and how that gets paid for, and it's such an inefficient blah, 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 blah. And I think the reality is I knew nothing about it, right? And so now I know this much about it, and I know enough to know that I'm probably not going to be the guy who changes that world. I'd like to find the guy who's going to change that world.
There's kind of a curve when you start learning about industry where at first you're like, wow, this is interesting, I'm going to do all, and then you start this sort of this,
that's right,
this like trough of realization, you know, like disappointment where you realize, oh wait, people have already figured out these 500 things. Like,
yeah, or it's so messed up how this thing works that my rational approach isn't actually going to be the solution. It's going to be some hybrid approach. And so, you know, I mean, I'd love to find the guy who's going to fix that, and he probably comes from the industry and recognizes all the things that are broken about it. And so anyway, the advice I would give is don't try to solve a problem you don't fully understand, because I think that's generally how people fail. So either pick a problem you have personally in an industry you have some expertise in. If you don't have any industry expertise, then you know,
maybe you'll get some first or something.
Yeah,
like do what you did, work at right. DoubleClick or.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, anything you do will get you some expertise, right? As long as you're not, you know, sitting around on your couch. So I think that there's a path, but for me, most, and especially in industries like advertising and B2B industries, I guess in the consumer internet, you can solve your own problem and it can be a big hit. But you're not going to solve the advertising problem. You're not going to build the next generation ad exchange unless you understand how the industry actually works, and that's a harder thing to do than most people appreciate.
When entrepreneurs are pitching you as an investor, like, what do you think makes a good pitch?
It's what I'm trying to read when I'm listening to an entrepreneur is really, you know, how well do they know the subject matter, how passionate are they about it, and do they have the chops to accomplish what they want to accomplish. One of the biggest mistakes I've made as an investor, and I made it on almost every deal I did early on, was I would look at the opportunity and I would think, well, how would I approach this opportunity? And I would get blind to how the investor was or how the investor would.
The entrepreneur.
I'm sorry, the entrepreneur. And so yeah, it was, for me, it was always a, you know, I made bad investments because I assumed that they were going to go after it the way I would go after it.
I find in my own investments that my worst ones were the ones where I liked the idea the best.
Yes.
Because I then overlooked maybe the mediocrity of the team.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think and again, I don't think of myself as an investor. It's something I do, you know, more for learning and for fun and things. I'm not a professional investor. There are guys who are much better at that than I am. But I do try to just you know, really understand how the person's going to approach the problem as opposed to falling in love with it.
Yeah. How does when you interview job candidate, I guess you're maybe doing some of that now, and you of course did a lot of the Right Media. Like, how does a salesperson or an engineer impress you?
I mean, for me, and hiring was a huge focus for us at Right Media. We had it was a tough group of folks in terms of the expectations. So we had a super high bar. You know, I was never qualified for any job I got in my life, including Right Media. So you know, I always assumed that I got jobs because I could communicate well, because I could show passion, because I could prove that I could learn really quickly. And so the number one thing that I look for, whether it's an engineer or it's a business person or in any role, is how fast can this person learn? You know, in the half an hour, 45 minutes I spend with them, are they processing the information that you know that's coming across the table, and are they able to show evolution during that short of a period of time? Almost any time that, you know, people are clearly learning something and during that conversation, it turns out to be a good hire.
Mm. What motivates you? I mean, I assume at this point, you have a lot of options in terms of how you could be spending your time.
Yeah.
You know, but you've decided to get back involved with startups and things. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I'm sure you are living this too. It's hard. It's a hard thing to get away from. You can get away from it for a period of time, and then you get pulled back into it because it's so interesting. The biggest thing I think what motivates me is learning stuff and new experiences. And you know, when I wasn't day-to-day working on projects, I was learning lots of other things. I was taking time for myself to learn things that I always wanted to learn how to do. And so now I feel like now that I'm spending more time back with startups and on these projects, the most fun part about it is being able to learn a lot of new stuff and participate in the startup environment. However, you know, it's also really nice not to be the guy in the seat who has to stay up all night and who sleeps with the phone right here all the time, because I'm not the one who has to ultimately make the final decision.
I found that when I had a period where I stepped out of the startup world, that I was reminded of how lucky we are to sort of deal with, you know, interact with almost always really, really smart and interesting people, and sort of constantly intellectually challenging. I don't know. So for me, that was sort of the drawback. Like, I needed that.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it's one of those things that when you're in it full time, you know, and Right Media, it was an amazing ride, but it was exhausting at the same time. And I think when I finished it, I was just like, you get sensory overload, and then you don't realize how much you miss that until you're out of it. So now I take it in smaller doses, you know, and I sort of choose it. You know, I manage it a little more to keep the balance. I suspect, much to possibly my family's dismay, that eventually I'll get pulled back into a high intensity, and hopefully it'll be a little easier.
Yeah, it always happens, I think.